let me introduce myself. Hi, everyone. My name is Tomi and I work at Macmillan Publishers. And I'm going to be presenting, or I'm going to be in conversation with our next speaker today, which is Anna Wiener, the author of the new book, Uncanny Valley, a memoir. So Anna Wiener is a contributing writer with, a contributing writer with The New Yorker, covering Silicon Valley, startup culture, and technology. Her first book, Uncanny Valley, a memoir of her time in the tech industry, was published in 2020. She currently lives in San Francisco. Today, Anna is going to be discussing Uncanny Valley, described as equal parts enchanting and subversive. Anna speaks about her time working for Silicon Valley startups, in which she deftly charts the tech industry shift from self-appointed world savior to democracy-endangering liability, alongside a personal narrative of aspiration, ambivalence, and disillusionment. So that's a bit of a mouthful, but thank you again for joining us today, Anna. And just to start us off, can you tell us a bit about your memoir, Uncanny Valley?
Sure. Thank you, Tomi. And thank you everyone for coming and to Macmillan for having me. It's always very strange to do a Zoom event because I've discovered that every joke you make on Zoom just is a total failure, just bombs every time. So this will be a very straight and dour conversation. Uncanny Valley is a memoir of my time working in Silicon Valley. I graduated from undergrad in 2009, right into a truly abysmal job market, and found my way to the publishing industry, and then was looking for something a little more, seemed to be a little more sustainable at the time, and wound up working for a data analytics company in San Francisco. It was really one of these, stumbling backwards into the future kind of things. And it is a personal story, but my hope is that it's more a memoir of a time and a place, that it captures a moment in history that I think is actually really critical and in many ways over. This era of 2010s startup culture, when there was all of this mythology around the young white male founder who was going to change the world for the better. And my hope is that the book is sort of a document of how people spoke and thought and behaved and understood the work that they were doing in this critical moment. So it's sort of it's an insider story with an outsider's perspective, and it is not a deeply personal narrative. It is really more about this ascendant power center and what it was like to live here in that time.
I think definitely, someone who's read the book, I think that's spot on. I think it really does a great job of just capturing.
Thank you. As someone who wrote the book, I hope so.
Also, but I think definitely one of the most interesting, I think, related to a lot of the folks who are watching today are college administrators trying to seek ways in which they can best help their students begin their whole entire university experiences. So I think maybe I'd love to hear a bit more about that, the aspects you're talking about your own experience, what you studied, and how you came to go from the publishing industry then to data analytics, and potentially how might your book speak to students who also worry or are in a similar position in which they feel they might be stifled professionally based on what they choose to study.
Sure. So I studied sociology. I was really interested in critical theory. I wrote my undergraduate thesis on the evangelical right and pop culture. These things, there's really not a bridge from that to this book, but I think that when I was in college, I really didn't have an understanding of what a liberal arts degree could do, or how I might be useful, or what industries might be receptive to my modes of thinking or to my education. And I think that another, I guess, a tension that I very quickly discovered when I entered the workforce, so the white collar workforce, was that there was this conflation of economic value with personal worth. And this this sense of, you know, financial success being equal to one's self-worth. And I think that that's actually quite present in Silicon Valley in a lot of ways. But I found that publishing, I mean, I entered publishing, I guess, in 2010, and Amazon, it was becoming extremely clear that Amazon really had the industry by the neck. And uh, it felt like there was no future. And I've since learned that this is something that people in publishing have been saying for decades, the sense that the sky is always falling. But I read one afternoon on the Paris Review blog, which like is not where one should be getting their tech news, but so it goes, that there was a startup that was disrupting publishing. And to me, this rhetoric was totally new. I was not paying attention to the tech industry. I didn't realize that this was an era when everyone was disrupting everything. And they had raised $3 million to build an e-reading app. And this idea was so exciting to me because it was new. I didn't like $3 million to me. I thought that just meant that they were like, you know, gonna buy out Simon and Schuster. Like I just had no concept of the kind of power that came with that sort of money. And I thought it was interesting. And there were these three young men who'd gone to, two of them had gone to Duke, I think it was. And they just had this confidence that I had never seen exhibited among my peers in, in book publishing in our 20s. And so that was sort of how that was my first job in tech. It was just a contract job. It turns out when you're building an app for people who love to read, it helps to have someone around who loves to read. But I went from there to this analytics company, in part because I liked the idea that data could have some narrative potential. I won't get into it too much, but this company was essentially helping other apps and websites collect data on how their users were using it. And to me, this was sort of a way of narrativizing how people were using the internet. I will say, I will be the first to admit I was not thinking about surveillance, or I had no concept of surveillance capitalism, no idea that this was part of an ecosystem that was often, you know, that had other manifestations that were detrimental to a lot of people and could be weaponized. But that's another conversation for another time. I do get into that a little bit in the book. But to go back to this question of how it might resonate with students who don't quite know what the future holds for them, or don't quite know how their skills might apply or their education, my hope is that it demystifies this industry that is so prominent and is so mythologized and has so much power. I think that Silicon Valley, for all of its own stories about itself, is very clubby, very exclusive in a lot of ways. And I think it is useful to kind of break apart the stories that an industry tells about itself and the way that the people inside of it behave. So I think probably a lot of freshmen in college are not yet sure what they want to do with their lives. I think there is a lot of opportunity, but my hope is that it helps, you know, helps them think both about, would help them think both about the industry itself specifically, but also how to think about one's worth in the world and how that ties to work.
I think, you know, it's always tough to hear, oh, publishing has no future. Oh no. But no, I think definitely, you know, I think that's very powerful. I think even more speaking towards how students first coming to university might feel, and how again your book might really offer some sort of their first experience reading literature at a high stage in a university setting, but also how best to identify with the students. I know one thing I found, or you know, I was thinking about my own university days when I first started, was this issue of imposter syndrome. And I know one of the lines that I found very, again, powerful when reading your book was this moment where you discuss when you went to a conference and you say, quote, among the computer science majors, I felt vaguely out of place, then embarrassed to have imposter syndrome at a conference designed to empower women in the workforce. Could you maybe speak more about this moment and how students might want to consider how structures of power inside and outside Silicon Valley or in their university setting, et cetera, tend to foster imposter syndrome?
Sure.
especially
So,
those with less privileged identities?
yeah, it's a huge question and a really important one. This conference that I was writing about is called the Grace Hopper Festival for Women in Computing, and it's sponsored by all of the tech giants. And it is as much a celebration of women in computing as it is a job fair. There are people, recruiters holding interviews on site. It really feels like you're sort of seeing this marketplace at work. And I think for me, as someone who didn't have a computer science background, who was interested in computers, but really more from a user perspective, maybe more from a cultural angle, it highlighted this internal hierarchy that exists in Silicon Valley between people with so-called technical skills and people who are and deal in so-called soft skills. These are obviously phrases that are really coded and can be used to devalue or undermine certain skill sets and types of people. They often map to they're often racially or coded or coded to gender. You often find women being told they're not technical enough to do a job. Anyway, I think that this is part of what I'm trying to get at when I talk about these mythologies or the stories that this industry tells about itself. A big story in Silicon Valley is that it is a meritocracy. It really is an industry that puts a lot of stock into this idea that the best will rise to the top. I think that when you are in an industry like this that says this is a meritocracy and the people who are running the show are there based on their own skill and talent, you can feel a little bit like the world is upside down because the industry is run primarily by young men, mostly white. And my limited experience of the world is that those are not the most talented, intelligent, deserving people around. So I think that this feeling of imposter syndrome can often come from a distance between what a person is experiencing in their day-to-day life at work and what the industry is saying they're a part of. It's the gap, I guess, between narrative and reality. And I think that this is not specific or unique to Silicon Valley, but it certainly feels intensified. I think that despite these really this idea that it is a meritocracy, not everyone has the same opportunity to prove themselves in the same way. I think that what you'll find is, let's say if you have an engineering team and there are 2 Black engineers and the rest of the engineers are white, that the Black engineers will be highly credentialed and will have advanced degrees and impressive internships, and the white engineers will not necessarily have that same kind of background. And so I think that that's a hypothetical example, but I think my point in using it is that
Dynamics.
sorry.
No, it's good.
Oh, just that that the doors aren't open, the same doors aren't open to everyone, and the same sort of stories don't apply to everyone.
No, for sure. Okay, so unfortunately the conversation is going to end up soon, but the last question, and just in this last 3 minutes, we have one from the audience.
Sure.
That says, Anna, I grew up in Silicon Valley and it's changed quite a bit since I was there. What future do you see for the Valley, especially as it might impact current and future college students?
That's such a good question. Well, I think one of the reasons I wrote the book when I did, I didn't plan to write a book. I thought I might someday after I'd worked in the industry for about 4 or 5 years, but I wrote it when I did because I felt that something had changed. I felt that there had been this moment, and in 2016 after the election, there was this increased sort of public awareness of what the industry was and what kind of power it had. And it felt like the party was over in a lot of ways. I think that I don't think the Valley is going anywhere. I mean, I think that what constitutes a tech company is a much bigger question, right? There are startups that are, venture funded that have fewer engineers than major banks. Our bank's tech company. Like, it's become a kind of a catch-all term. I think that I think that the industry is coming into its power in a very awkward way. I think there are a lot of people who deny that they are no longer underdogs. I find this personally confusing and troubling. I do think that the sort of the younger generation that I have come in contact with in my reporting and just living here and socially, people seem to be much more aware of these questions of power and also of the context of the industry and the history of the industry and the I guess the sort of the network that it's in. I think people are much more aware of the supply chain that Silicon Valley is a part of, and the media is finally giving attention to Amazon warehouse workers who are organizing and Facebook employees who are talking about organizing, and I think that the future. I mean, futurist speculation is always a losing game, and so I try not to do it. But I do think that it would be a good thing for these companies to be stripped of some of their mythology, to be taken seriously as powerhouses and as businesses, because with that sort of seriousness, hopefully will come some degree of accountability. And so I think, I think there's hope there too, because I think that we are moving into a period where people are starting to think about what might come next. And I think for a long time, the industry has sort of sold this idea that all technological progress is social progress and that this is all very inevitable. And I think that we're starting to see some pushback against the idea of inevitability. And and I hope that the sort of younger generation of people who are interested in this field or who find themselves on the sort of user end of these products and technologies share that feeling, that this is not inevitable, that this is all actually quite new and there's always room for it to change.
I think that's beautiful. I think definitely the importance of scrutinizing. Scrutinize what you do. But thank you again, Anna. It's been great
Thank
talking
you,
to you.
Tomi. Thank
It's
you
been
all.
really fun. And again, the book is Uncanny Valley.
Take care.